I'm Caitlin Broms-Jacobs. I'm the principal oboist of the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, and I also wear a different hat as an arranger. So if that's another thing that I really enjoy doing.
Okay, and we're so excited that the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra will be premiering your arrangement of Renaissance works in March. And this will be a world premiere performance of your arrangement that was commissioned by the MCO. So could you tell us a bit about how this came about?
Sure. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was sort of searching for what we could do, MCO thought maybe we could play like some chamber ensembles, and asked me and my colleagues Tracy Wright and Alan Harrington if we would be interested in playing something together. And so we discussed what we might play together. Tracy is an oboist and Alan is a bassoonist. And we really liked the idea of playing the Goldberg variations. So I arranged that for the three of us, and we played it on a concert at the Art Gallery. And it was really successful. So, and we really loved playing together. So then a few months later, MCO asked me if I would be interested in arranging something kind of as a follow-up to that. And I thought about what I might do, and I had a few ideas. But in the end, this is what I settled on as my favorite idea. And fortunately, MCO liked that idea too. So I worked on it, and here it is.
And here we are coming up to the performance. And you've done quite a number of arrangements. So could you tell us what is involved in being an arranger? I know that's a big question, but in the essence of it, perhaps.
Sure. So basically, you're taking a piece that somebody else has written and putting it into a different form. So that usually means for different instruments, and usually it means, or often means, for a different number of instruments. So I like to think of arranging in a few categories. There's one category which is reducing something. So that was like the Pulcinella arrangement. You're taking something that's written for a much larger ensemble and trying to capture the essence of it with many fewer people. So in that case, it was chamber orchestra down to just a quintet. And so that has a unique set of challenges. And then there's the kind of arrangement where you're taking something that exists in a very like sparse, simple, or form with not a lot of material, and you're going to expand that for many more people, or you're going to add material. So in a sense, like this Renaissance arrangement is kind of like that. But anytime somebody takes a song and arranges it for full orchestra, it's kind of like that. It's this expansion type. And then there's, everything in between. You might take something that's written for flute and piano and transcribe it for oboe and piano. That's sort of in between, right? So, but either way, you're trying to capture the the spirit of the original piece, trying to maintain that while putting it in a different format. So there's often there's a lot of creativity involved. But one thing that I think is interesting is that, people tend to group arranging and composing together. But I actually think that arranging is in some ways very similar to performing, because as performers, our job is to interpret the composer's, interpret somebody else's music. And we try to maintain the spirit of the composer, play in the right style, really bring out the composer's vision, but at the same time with our own personality, with our own creativity. That's what makes a great performance. And so in a sense, I'm doing the exact same thing, arranging. I'm interpreting that composer's piece in a slightly different way, but trying to really keep the spirit of what they intended the same. So I think of it all as interpretation, if that makes any sense.
That's a fantastic answer. Yeah, really opened my eyes to that. Thank you. So when did you start arranging, and how did you know this is something you would enjoy and excel at?
Well, I'm not sure if I excelled at it at the beginning, but I think, my motivation has always been that if I arrange this piece that's not for my instrument, then I get to play it. And, you know, I'm always interested in playing, well, everything really. So I think the first arrangement I did was when I was 10 years old. And actually I did a few arrangements as a kid, and before I knew anything about music theory, really. But I just really enjoyed it, and by some stroke of luck, they came out at least reasonably good for a 10-year-old. And so I've been doing it along the way, like, you know, for all kinds of different things. I had a wonderful duo with a lifelong friend who's a cellist, and I've arranged numerous things for the two of us to play oboe and cello and things like that. So I guess it's just sort of been a thing that I've done all along, but I never really thought, you know, I don't know, I never really thought that, you know, somebody would want to commission me to do something. So this is like sort of incredible, you know.
And tell us about having a career that includes being a performer and arranger. And I know you kind of alluded to this already, but do you find that these two activities complement each other?
Arranging a piece, you get to know it in a way that you wouldn't get to know if you were just playing it. And I mean, you can study the scores and everything, but you begin to think in a different way when you have to think about how to rewrite it, kind of. And I think that can really add to like the understanding of the piece and really help in kind of guiding a great interpretation for performance too.
So could you tell us a bit about the pieces that are included in this arrangement and why you chose this repertoire?
Sure. So, well, maybe to start a little further back, when I was trying to think about what I might want to do for this project, one of my original ideas was to do an arrangement of Respighi's Ancient Airs and Dances, which is just such a beautiful piece. And what Respighi did was took Renaissance lute music and transcribed it for orchestra. And so I thought, okay, like, double reed instruments and Renaissance music, it's a natural fit. So that's what I thought. But part of what Respighi did in his arrangement was create a lot of different colors just by changing the instrumentation. So the same, you know, the violins play it, and then maybe the oboe plays it, and then the violas or the whole string. I'm not familiar enough to tell you exactly, but basically there's a lot of that color change with just different instruments. And so if that were arranged for just the three of us, it would be us sort of playing the same thing over and over again. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that this would be the most effective. So then I began to think, well, wait a second, what if I try to do what Respighi did? I mean, I'm definitely not a great composer like Respighi, but it would be a really interesting challenge. So then I began to look for, you know, then I started basically in the same place, right? So I spent like 2 weeks just listening to tons and tons of music. And I'm just so lucky now that we can do that. Respighi had to go to like these, you know, libraries and dig through dusty manuscripts. and in fact, in tablature, like, because most of what he used is lute music. And if you're not a lutist, I mean, who can read lute tablature? It's completely incomprehensible. So anyway, so I found, you know, some pieces that I wanted to use, and then I found the music for them, which also wasn't that easy. And actually, in fact, some of the music didn't seem to exist, so I transcribed it from the recording. These are simple pieces. It's not like transcribing a Mahler symphony. And
could I interject and ask you, what's the difference between arranging and transcribing?
That's a good question. And honestly, I'm not really sure that I have the right answer. I've always thought that transcribing was closer to just either writing down something that, like, you know, you hear, like, you know, Mozart famously heard this performance of the Allegri Miserere and one time and then wrote it down. Like I would say that was transcribing.
Yeah.
And I think transcribing is more straightforward and possibly like it's not as much of a creative process, whereas arranging is a much more creative and individual kind of thing. That's not a very good answer, but it's kind of a spectrum, I think, also.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Since you mentioned the two words, I just wanted to kind of get your take on that. But that's, yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and so I guess with asking me why I chose these pieces, there's actually an amazing wealth of Renaissance music that people have recorded, and a lot of it's really beautiful. These pieces sort of jumped out to me as something memorable and special or unique, or captured a certain spirit or a certain kind of flair that was exactly what I was looking for. And so I was really inspired actually by my work on the Goldberg variations when I began working on this suite, because what I think is so remarkable about the Goldberg variations is that there's this really amazing dramatic arc that goes through the whole of the 30 variations. And you go from the aria, which is essentially home, through all of these, it's like a Gulliver's Travels kind of, and and then there's the adagio, which is like, the furthest point from home. It's like a real like, am I really going to make it back? And then there's like, the Quod Libet, which is like you're standing, you can see your house in the distance, and then we return to the aria. And I think that's just a huge part of the magic of how all of these short variations that, okay, they're connected by the key, they're connected by the harmonic pattern, but there are all these different moods and different textures, and they go by really quickly. And why does it all work as a whole piece? There's an arc. And so I wanted to capture that kind of thing for my suite. And also when you hear Renaissance albums, or actually any album, but particularly these Renaissance pieces, they're so short. And sometimes you'll hear an album of somebody playing like Venetian lute music, and it's, like 25 pieces of Venetian lute music, and every single one of them is beautiful, but they don't create a dramatic arc. They don't become a piece as a whole, right? Like they're just one tiny piece, and then you go to a next tiny piece. And that's nice for an album, but I didn't want that for my suite. I wanted it to have like a meaning as a journey, right? Like I wanted them to have a relationship to each other, as a suite should, really. So actually, one of the things that I did was, after I chose the pieces and I came up with an order for like which one's going to be the first one, which one's going to be the last one, and then I structured everything in, like I grouped things. For example, like I have a set of courtly dances and then a set of like wilder, sort of more peasant dances. Anyway, but I took quite a bit of time to figure out the key sequence so that like it would all make sense. And I didn't want everything to be in the same key, but I needed to flow correctly, harmonically. So some things are in the original key, but most of them aren't. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit is that too much?
That's fantastic. Like I've already learned so much about what I can expect to hear. Thank you. Great overview.
Okay.
And then of course, what are some of the challenges that emerged as we were working on this particular arrangement?
Yeah, so this is something I've never done before. I've never done an arrangement where I really had to use that much of my own creativity and it really has one toe into composition, kind of. And in fact, there's one movement that I pretty much wrote. I mean, I won't tell you which one it is. Maybe you can guess when you hear it. So it was by far like the most, well, what's the most in depth and the most sort of, the highest percentage of Caitlin versus the composer, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun, but a major challenge. And I wasn't even sure, can I do this? Can I write this movement? Well, I think I did. So I thought that was really interesting. Anyway.
And when you first sit down to start arranging your piece, and if you want to kind of think about this one in particular, what's your process? And do you have a general jumping off point, or do you change your approach for each piece?
Yeah, that is a good question. I thought, what is my process? I don't even know. I mean, I think once I'm familiar with the piece, which is of course the first step, I think I somehow tend to get ideas of what I might do in terms of instrumentation. And the ideas don't necessarily come when I'm looking at the score. It might happen when I'm, like awake at 4 a.m. and I can't sleep. And so, yeah, I find that it works best if I come up with the ideas and then try to write them down versus like looking at the computer and trying to you know what I mean. But yeah, as for process, I mean, I guess one of the most important things is just the technical aspect of it. Like you have to assign the notes to the people who can play them in that like the appropriate register. For a trio like this, it's really essential that there be enough places for people to breathe, and that's something that I try to be really aware at. It's easy to overlook, even if you're trying really hard, because the computer doesn't really have a problem playing a long phrase without. But yeah, and I try to be conscious of not writing things that are going to be too difficult, like knowing the instrument really well. Like the goal, of course, is to write something that sounds super fantastic and flashy, but hopefully isn't too difficult, because otherwise it's an added burden that takes time away from just really the music, really. I mean, it should sounding virtuoso isn't the same as being unplayably difficult. So I try to avoid that anyway.
And as a performer yourself, you know the value of that, right? Having music that's playable.
Oh, definitely. There have been some very difficult things that have come my way in the New Music Festival, particularly, that you kind of wonder if that was really necessary to write something quite that difficult, but
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about the experience of performing one of your own arrangements, and could you describe that experience of rehearsing and performing a piece that you arranged compared to rehearsing and performing other works?
Sure. Well, in a lot of ways, it's not that different. The main difference is that, if something doesn't work, if there's a wrong note or something, I've written something that is like really awkward on an instrument that I don't know very well, like a string instrument. It's kind of my responsibility to fix it. So there's this sort of added pressure of is the thing gonna work, basically. But that usually gets resolved at the first rehearsal, and so far it's never been really an issue. It's always been fine. There's certainly been minor details. To err is human, but yeah, but when it comes to the rehearsal process and everything, it's not really that different. We sort of rehearse the piece as though we would any other piece. I might, knowing the score on a level that probably is more you know, more in depth than anyone else, might potentially give me certain like ideas about how I might think we might try, you know, play something in terms of style or something. But you know, overall, it's really not a big difference.
Wow. Yeah, I kind of would have thought that. It's hard almost to be in a rehearsal because you know that that's what you put on the page in front of everyone, and then kind of wearing the two different hats.
Yeah. It's different, but not as different as I would have thought, I guess.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. Great. And it must be very exciting for any arranger to hear one of their arrangements performed live, especially a world premiere, and especially when you're one of the performers. So what are you most looking forward to when the suite is performed by the MCO in March? And what do you hope the audience will experience at the concert?
Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to playing it because I think it's, you know, the pieces that I've chosen are to, you know, turn into this suite. It's really incredible music. It's, you know, think about the fact that it's at least 500 years old and it's still relevant. It's still, we still find it beautiful and meaningful. And so I'm really looking forward to playing that and to expressing all of that. And I hope what the audience will take from it is an emotional and meaningful and enjoyable performance, as I always hope when that's the goal of performance, really.
Wow, we can't wait to hear it. I can't wait to hear it in March.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Caitlin. It was so nice to meet you and chat with you today.
Likewise, so nice to meet you.
See you
Okay.
in March.